Did you know that the most powerful throne in human history was not forged from solid gold, nor was it encrusted with flawless diamonds? It was actually made of ceramic. And did you know that the most magnificent, glamorous royals of Europe once considered answering the call of nature right behind a velvet curtain in a crowded ballroom to be an absolute privilege of the elite? Today, we are opening the door to the smelliest chapter of history that your textbooks conveniently forgot to mention. Welcome, fellow history buffs and English learners, to the Past Tense No Sense podcast. I am your host, and today we are diving headfirst into the crappy history of the toilet, literally. So, plug in your earphones, take a deep breath, and wait, on second thought, do not breathe in. Hold your breath. Imagine, if you will, that you have just time-traveled back to the magnificent Palace of Versailles in the 17th century. You are rubbing shoulders with the absolute cream of the crop, the elite of French society. Your eyes are completely dazzled by the gold leaf decorations, the sparkling crystal chandeliers, and the enormous, puffy silk dresses. It is a feast for the eyes. But your nose? Your poor nose is suffering through a living nightmare. You are hit by an overwhelming, eye-watering stench of stale ammonia mixed with absurdly expensive but cheap-smelling floral perfume. You look around, utterly confused. Why does the pinnacle of human elegance smell like a neglected public restroom at a gas station? The answer is mind-blowing. This massive, sprawling palace, home to thousands of the richest people on Earth, did not have a single functioning bathroom. Not one. Whenever nature called, the aristocrats would simply find a dark corner, a staircase, or squat behind a heavy curtain, do their business, and walk away like nothing happened. It was a golden age for art and philosophy, but a dark age for hygiene. But believe it or not, humanity was not always this disgusting. To find a time when people actually cared about where they dropped their daily baggage, we have to rewind the clock way back to the glory days of the Roman Empire. The Romans were absolute engineering geniuses. They built massive aqueducts to transport fresh water, and they had public latrines. Now, the phrase public latrine sounds somewhat civilized, right? Well, do not get too excited. These were truly public. Picture a massive room lined with stone benches. Carved into these benches was a long row of holes. There were no privacy walls, no cubicles, no doors. You just walked in, hiked up your toga, picked a hole right next to your neighbor, and sat down. For the ancient Romans, going to the bathroom was a highly social networking event. You would sit shoulder to shoulder with completely random strangers, discussing the latest political scandals in the Senate, debating philosophy, or complaining about the price of olives, all while actively pushing out your lunch. It was the ancient equivalent of scrolling through social media, except you were literally sharing the experience with the guy next to you. But the craziest part of the Roman toilet experience was the toilet paper, or rather, the lack of it. They used a fascinating little tool called a xylospongium. What is a xylospongium, you ask? It is exactly what it sounds like in Latin, a sea sponge attached to the end of a wooden stick. You would use this sponge on a stick to wipe yourself clean. But wait, it gets worse. You did not have your own personal sponge. Oh no. The xylospongium was a communal tool. After you finished your business, you would rinse the dirty sponge in a small, shallow channel of running water at your feet, or dunk it into a shared bucket of highly concentrated salt and vinegar water. Then, you simply passed the wet, salty sponge to the guy sitting next to you. Sharing is caring, right? Not in this case. It was a spectacular way to share diseases, but hey, at least they had a system. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. The mighty Roman Empire eventually collapsed, and when it fell, it took its magnificent plumbing and sewer systems down with it. Welcome to the Dark Ages, a period where Europe went backward by about 1,000 years in terms of basic sanitation. During the Middle Ages, the concept of a sewer was pretty much forgotten. So, what did everyday people do? They used something called a chamber pot. A chamber pot was essentially just a large bowl or bucket that you kept under your bed. You would wake up in the middle of the night, use the pot, and go back to sleep. But what happens in the morning when the pot is full? You certainly could not flush it. Instead, the standard medieval waste disposal method was incredibly straightforward and absolutely terrifying. People would simply carry their full chamber pots to the nearest window, stick their heads out, and yell, "Gardez-le." This phrase comes from the French expression "prenez garde à l'eau," which translates to "watch out for the water." But let us be brutally honest here, it was definitely not just water. After shouting the warning, they would chuck the entire contents of the pot directly onto the busy street below. Walking to the market in medieval London or Paris was an extreme sport. You had to constantly look up and dodge flying projectiles of human waste. If you were unlucky, you would get a very unpleasant surprise shower. The streets were essentially open sewers, covered in a thick, toxic layer of mud, rotting garbage, and excrement. The smell was so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. If you lived in a fancy medieval castle, things were slightly more sophisticated, but still incredibly gross. Castles featured a specialized room called a garderobe. The word sounds like wardrobe, and strangely enough, people actually hung their clothes in there to kill fleas with the strong smell of ammonia. A garderobe was a small, narrow closet built right into the thick outer stone walls of the castle. Inside, there was a stone seat with a hole. When you sat on this medieval toilet, your waste would fall directly down a long shaft, dropping out of the bottom of the castle and plunging right into the moat. The moat, of course, was the large ring of water surrounding the castle, designed to keep out enemy armies. Forget about alligators or sharp spikes. Wading through a medieval castle moat meant swimming through generations of royal sewage. No invading army wanted to swim through that biological hazard. It was the ultimate, albeit stinky, defense mechanism. As we move out of the Dark Ages and into the Renaissance, European royalty decided they needed something a bit more exclusive than a hole over a moat. The monarchs became obsessed with their own comfort, and this led to the creation of one of the most bizarre and highly coveted job titles in the history of the world: the Groom of the Stool. Let us talk about King Henry VIII of England. He was a massive man with an equally massive ego. Henry appointed a special nobleman whose sole responsibility in life was to follow the king around with a portable, velvet-cushioned commode. When the king was ready to perform his royal duty, the groom of the stool would set up the box, help the king undress, and stand there waiting. But that was not all. The groom of the stool was literally responsible for wiping the king's royal bottom. Now, you might think this sounds like the absolute worst, most degrading job on the planet, but you would be completely wrong. Being the groom of the stool was the most prestigious gig in the entire royal court. Because this man was locked in a small, private room with the king during his most vulnerable moments, he had the king's undivided attention. The groom of the stool became the king's most trusted confidant. They knew all the state secrets, the political gossip, and the true inner thoughts of the monarch. The man who controlled the king's toilet paper essentially controlled the kingdom. But despite the luxurious velvet seats and royal butt wipers, the underlying problem remained completely unsolved. There were still no pipes, no running water, and no way to actually make the waste disappear. The world desperately needed a hero. A hero who could wash away the filth and bring humanity out of the dark, smelly ages. And that hero was about to arrive with an invention that would change the course of human history forever. The year was 1592. The hero we desperately needed was a rather cheeky English courtier, poet, and inventor named Sir John Harington. He was actually the godson of Queen Elizabeth I. Harrington designed a device that he affectionately called the Ajax. It featured a pan with an opening at the bottom, sealed by a leather valve. A system of handles and weights allowed water to rush in from a cistern above, washing the contents down into a cesspool. It was, ladies and gentlemen, the world's very first flushing toilet. Harrington was incredibly proud of his contraption. He even installed a working model for Queen Elizabeth at her palace in Richmond. You would think that, upon seeing this miraculous device, the entire world would immediately adopt it, bringing an end to the era of chamber pots and flying street poop. But history is rarely that logical. The flushing toilet was a massive, spectacular flop. It was an absolute commercial failure. But why? Why would people reject a clean, flushing toilet? The answer lies in the fundamental lack of infrastructure. Harrington had invented a brilliant flushing mechanism, but there was no running water to feed the cistern, and, more importantly, there were no underground sewers to carry the waste away. When you flushed the Ajax, the waste did not magically disappear to a water treatment plant. It simply rushed forcefully into an unventilated pit directly underneath the house. Because the flushing action disturbed the stagnant waste, it actually made the smell significantly worse than a standard chamber pot. The Queen reportedly complained that the sound of the rushing water was too loud and terrifying, and the resulting odor from the disturbed cesspit was unbearable. The world simply was not ready. The flushing toilet was put on pause for nearly 300 long, smelly years. During those 3 centuries, cities grew exponentially. The Industrial Revolution brought millions of people cramming into urban centers like London and Paris. With no proper sanitation, the situation went from bad to absolutely catastrophic. Houses were built with deep brick pits underneath them, called cesspools. These pits were designed to hold human waste, but with so many people living packed together, the cesspools overflowed constantly. The waste seeped into the ground, contaminating the drinking water from the wells. The streets ran thick with foul-smelling sludge. To manage the overflowing underground pits, cities employed workers known as the night soil men. These brave, terribly underpaid souls would come in the dead of night, climb into the pitch-black, suffocatingly smelly brick pits underneath people's homes, and shovel the accumulated human excrement into horse-drawn carts. They called the poop night soil to make it sound a bit more polite, but there was nothing polite about it. They would then cart this highly toxic sludge out to the countryside to sell to farmers as fertilizer. It was a miserable, dangerous job, and it was barely making a dent in the growing mountain of urban waste. The tipping point finally arrived in the blazing hot summer of 1858. This legendary historical event is formally known as the Great Stink. London was experiencing an unprecedented heat wave. Temperatures soared, baking the city in a suffocating, sweltering oven. At this time, the River Thames, the majestic waterway flowing right through the heart of London, was not a beautiful river. It was an open, sluggish, heavily polluted sewer. Millions of gallons of raw human waste, animal carcasses from slaughterhouses, and toxic chemicals from factories were dumped directly into the Thames every single day. As the blazing summer sun beat down on the thick brown water of the River Thames, the river literally began to ferment. It bubbled, it baked, it started to cook. And then it unleashed a stench so powerful, so apocalyptic, that it brought the entire capital city of the British Empire to its knees. The smell of rotting waste was so dense that people were collapsing in the streets. They vomited on the sidewalks. Citizens walked around with handkerchiefs pressed tightly against their faces, soaked in strong perfume or camphor, desperately trying to filter the putrid air.
But the absolute best part of the Great Stink was that the newly built Houses of Parliament were situated right on the banks of the River Thames. The politicians, the wealthy lawmakers who had ignored the sanitation crisis for decades, were suddenly trapped in a building surrounded by a boiling river of their own making. The stench invaded the parliamentary chambers. It was completely unbearable. In a panic, the politicians ordered the staff to soak massive curtains in chloride of lime and hang them over the windows, hoping to block the smell. It did absolutely nothing. The lawmakers were seen running out of the building, tears streaming down their faces, clutching their noses. The mighty British Parliament was defeated by poop. Faced with the undeniable reality of the stench, the government finally realized they could not ignore the problem any longer. The Great Stink forced their hands. Within a record-breaking 18 days, they passed a law funding the construction of a massive, comprehensive underground sewer system. They hired a brilliant civil engineer named Joseph Bazalgette. Bazalgette designed an incredible network of intercepting sewers running for over 80 miles underground, catching the waste before it could reach the river and carrying it far away from the city center. It was a monumental feat of engineering, and it saved millions of lives from waterborne diseases like cholera. With a proper sewer system finally in place, the world was finally ready for the flushing toilet. Enter a man with perhaps the most unfortunate, yet perfectly appropriate name in history: Thomas Crapper. Now, despite popular urban legends, Thomas Crapper did not actually invent the toilet. Sir John Harrington and a few other inventors claimed that title. However, Thomas Crapper was a brilliant plumber and a relentless businessman. He championed the modern flushing toilet. He opened one of the first bathroom showrooms in the world, displaying beautifully decorated porcelain toilets to the public. He held numerous patents for plumbing fixtures, including the revolutionary floating ball cock mechanism that stops the water tank from overflowing. Most importantly, engineers during this era perfected the U-bend pipe. If you look behind your toilet today, you will see the pipe curves in a U shape. This simple trap holds a small amount of water, creating an airtight seal that prevents the horrific sewer gases from rising back up into your bathroom. The combination of Bazalgette's underground sewers, Crapper's marketing genius, and the brilliant U-bend trap finally gave humanity the clean, private, and odor-free bathroom experience we enjoy today. So, what is the grand, satirical takeaway from this aromatic journey through time? We often measure human progress by the wars we have won, the territories we have conquered, or the grand philosophical speeches our leaders have made. We build giant marble statues of kings and generals on horseback. But perhaps we are celebrating the wrong heroes. The undeniable truth is that our modern civilization does not rest on the shoulders of politicians or warriors. It rests on a massive network of underground PVC pipes and the brilliant minds of plumbers and civil engineers. The humble porcelain throne has saved more lives from deadly diseases than any doctor in history. The sanitary sewer system is the true foundation of human society. Without it, we would all still be throwing our business out of the window and dodging flying chamber pots. So, the next time you retreat to the bathroom, sit down on your pristine ceramic throne and effortlessly flush your troubles away with the push of a simple button. Take a moment to reflect. Bow your head in quiet reverence. You are not just using a bathroom. You are experiencing the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. Thank you so much for tuning in to this incredibly smelly episode of the Past Tense No Sense podcast. If you enjoyed learning English while diving into the dirty details of the past, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment down below with your favorite weird history fact, and share this podcast with a friend. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and for the love of history, please remember to flush.